Good morning to you. Mark Suttle with HurricaneTrack.com here. Time for your off-season edition of the Hurricane Outlook and Discussion. Of course, no hurricanes out there to talk about, although we will take a look at a couple of things that are likely going to impact the upcoming hurricane season. Instead, as this background picture shows you, it's from my friend David, who lives over near San Angelo, Texas. He retired there from the Beaumont, Port Arthur area. A Snowy South, that is the title, because that's pretty much the way it is. There's more snow in the deep south, Texas, on across today into Louisiana and other areas, Mississippi, Alabama, than we're seeing up in New England. It's just a flipped pattern. It's kind of crazy. We will look at that. But first, let's take a look at the sea surface temperature anomalies, a quick tour. Not much change. The Pacific remains colder than average overall. The La Nina holding on firm. At the same time, look at the main development region, much warmer than it should be overall. But the Northwest Atlantic really stands out here. We're talking anomalies, departures from the long-term average of 4, 5, 6 degrees. I mean, it's off the scale. You see the scale over here only goes up to 5 degrees Celsius. And these darkest of reds in here indicating at least 5 degrees Celsius warmer than average. And this pattern looks to persist for the coming weeks and months. I'll show you that as we progress forward in the update. Another way to look at all of this is from the Southern Oscillation Index, the difference in pressures between Tahiti and Darwin, all of these areas, of course, in the extreme southwest tropical Pacific, and all of the numbers now, all of the index values strongly positive, no signs of change in this whatsoever. And that leads credence to this tweet from Ben Knoll the other day, that the latest North American multi-model ensemble, just a fancy way of describing all of the different models that go into making this particular graphic here. This is the sea surface temperature anomaly animation. This goes through September. It starts over again January, February. Look at that La Nina there. Keep your eye on a couple of things. Here's the La Nina in the Pacific, August, September. It actually strengthens just a little bit, or at least expands some, certainly not losing much of its identity, and absolutely no sign of El Nino. But at the same time, look at how warm the Atlantic gets as we progress through March. There's April, May, June, July, and especially right up here in the far northeastern Atlantic near Iceland. Wow, very, very warm overall sea surface temperatures. These are anomalies here, sea surface temperature anomaly in degrees Celsius for the next several months. And you might be thinking, well, this is a long way out. It's only January 11th. Give me a break. Why are we talking about this so far out? The models are getting much better at seeing these larger patterns. We looked at the CANSIPs last week, sort of the Canadian version of this, if you will. It's not really, but the Euro, the CFS, the NMME, all of them are starting to show this pattern going into the summer months of a cold Pacific, a warm Atlantic, and as Ben alludes to here, this is the setup, very early signs here for another active hurricane season. And the nice thing about this is we can watch this on a weekly and monthly basis and see how things progress. But as of now, and especially with the SOI as positive as it is, there are no signs of change in this overall pattern. And in fact, just one thing to point out in the Pacific, it's now getting colder up in the subtropics. This isn't so much the subtropics, but the overall Pacific pattern, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, what we call the PDO, also seems to be cooling, while the Atlantic, the AMO, the Atlantic Multi-Decadal Oscillation, is warming. So that's something to keep in mind, something that we can watch for in the coming weeks and months as we progress towards the 2021 hurricane season. Now, this past hurricane season, I wanted to show you this. Jack Sillen had tweeted about this yesterday, I think it was, or sometime over the weekend. I guess the AMS conference is being held online, and they had different presentations from a lot of different people. Oh, I can't wait for the conferences to finally be able to resume in person. I think we can all agree with that. But one of the graphics that they were showing was from the National Hurricane Center and the storm surge unit. They do the slosh model and the different storm surge forecasts for inundation. And this is just an example of how to communicate just a few miles in change of track. And in this case, the purple here which I will outline in yellow real quick. This was the actual track of Hurricane Laura last August, late August. And of course, the worst of the surge was over here to the right of the track, and mainly along the immediate coastal areas of mostly lower population areas of southwest Louisiana, Creole, Grand Chenier, and points east from there, and obviously inland across those beautiful areas of the wildlife preserve down there. Really an amazing part of the country if you haven't been there, but unfortunately they are susceptible to surge. So we remember as Laura approached, there was concern that could it get as far over to the west as potentially near Houston and Galveston, way over here, maybe closer to Beaumont, Port Arthur, and the Texas-Louisiana state line. You know, there was a lot of, even the Euro Ensemble suggested that. We remember that, closing in on August 25th, 26th, 24th, 25th, 26th, even the day of the 26th that, you know, made landfall into the night of the early into the morning hours of the 27th, late night 26th, 27th, there was still uncertainty as exactly where the track would end up. And so if you shift this just a few miles to the west, and this was the actual landfall instead, that's the situation, this pink area in here, where you would have put 5 to 10 feet more storm surge up into areas like Lake Charles. And so this shows you that it's not that big of a difference where, in terms of track, that you can have tremendous differences in impact. So this is just one of the examples. And then how do you communicate that to people? Because I remember after landfall, there was a lot of talk about that significant storm surge not happening. And of course, we know that it did happen. The survey teams went down to Creole, Grand Chenier, and other areas down there. They call those camps. I've learned that. And some of those camps did have evidence of storm surge, still water elevations of 17 feet. And I don't know about you, but I don't know anybody that's 17 feet tall. No human beings, right? So this is what we're up against when we're talking about communicating risk and impacts. And, you know, it's not just the category, it's not just the wind, but you have to deal with storm surge. And then you have to deal with where will those impacts be, and people focusing on the exact center. And just stuff we'll get into as we get into the upcoming season and when we approach hurricane awareness and that kind of thing. All right? All right, so lower 48 weather will leave the tropics. So for the most part, with the exception of, well, let's get a color that stands out, shall we? With the exception of the winter storm hazards down in the deep south, and we're talking about eastern Texas now through northern Louisiana. And I saw, I think Ben also tweeted about how Louisiana had 5 tropical cyclone impacts and, you know, within the last 8 months, and now they're having snow. So yes, parts of the deep south getting an unusual dose of winter weather. Nothing up here in the northeast along the mid-Atlantic. Another storm system coming into the Pacific Northwest with more rain at the lower elevations. You know the drill. Snow at the higher elevations. Wind advisories for a good chunk of Montana there as a powerful storm system comes in. Now the thing about it is we don't have a tremendous amount of polar air. It's winter, it's January 11th, we're roughly halfway through the winter, but we don't have a lot of deep, solidified, entrenched polar air that has come across the northern latitudes spilling down into the lower 48. That hasn't happened yet. Instead, we get sort of this Pacific air, it's modified cold air, or these shallower troughs that come through and deliver the colder air to the northern parts of the lower 48. No, but that being said, it's cold enough down south, and this upper level energy is helping too, you know, the cold air in the upper levels for snow. So the bottom line is you don't need those minus 20s and minus 30s up here where that air mass spills south and it's, you know, in the teens in the deep south and so forth to get wintry weather. It has to be about 32 degrees at the surface, plus or minus. You know, you can still get snow accumulation if the ground temperature is 35, but it's all about the cold air in the different layers of the atmosphere and a storm track. So we do have some cold air down here, but we also have this favorable storm track that's been combining some of the Pacific energy with the Southern Branch energy, and here you go. So we're getting these storms one after the other. But the question is, when will we see the truly deep cold air that could help fuel a major winter storm? And so far, I don't see that happening anytime soon. So let's just look at the GFS from the 0Z run last night. The current storm system kind of fizzles out, which is really rare to see. You see it goes on there. This is 48 hours out. This is Wednesday. And only the Pacific Northwest, say only, this is where the action's going to be, all up here. So Washington, Oregon, interior parts of that region, Idaho and western Montana, that part of the Rockies and the Olympics, the Olympic range of the mountains there, the Shasta, Siskiyous, all that. I'm trying to remember my geography of that area. Beautiful part of the country, never been to it yet. But boy, they're going to rack up some serious snow and even some precip down into Northern California, where you could always use it, of course. But no major storms. As you can see, we go out through time. These clipper systems, one of them coming out of Canada there across the northern tier, right there, of the U.S. And that helps to usher down some cold air, but it's still not that unbelievably record-setting, deeply entrenched. It's pretty transient. These blasts of cold air come through. We're 6 days out, finally 7 days out, and there's just not much evidence of sustained cold just yet. And without that, and we can see that represented here, we don't have the mechanism to get any major storms, because a big contributor to storms in the winter is the difference in temperatures, that temperature contrast. And as you look at the anomalies here, I'm sorry, these are actual temperatures, there's just not that much, if we go through the same time period, in the way of sustained cold, right? And in fact, we can shift it to anomalies just real quick here. 2 meter temperature anomaly. So here we are at 5 days out, and the blues are your anomalies, your reds are your are positive anomalies, the blues are negative. And so, you know, it's transient. See, and then you get towards the later part of the period, and it's mainly out west again. But the bottom line, without the sustained cold and the storm track combining, it's going to be a snowy south and not a snowy east. And that's the punchline, so to speak. There's just not the mechanism yet, that amazing temperature gradient, where very cold air comes down with a lot of energy coming from the southern branch of the jet stream to create these contrasts to give you these big storms. Once in a while they show up in the modeling, but it's just not coming together just yet. So until that happens, it'll remain kind of this interesting pattern where you see snow from San Angelo and Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, but not your mega snow scenes from New York, from Philly, you know, DC, Baltimore. It's just not in the cards yet. Boston, no. Cape Cod, no. You know, just run-of-the-mill, you know, garden variety snowstorms, but nothing major just yet. Now, before I sign off, I will tell you this, and we know this by now, hopefully, February is the peak month for winter storms, like September is the peak month for hurricanes. February is the peak month, so I would suspect that we'll get enough cold air entrenched later in the month that the models will then begin to adjust, and we will start to see the pattern come together. Then I bet we'll see one or two pretty significant, if not major, East Coast winter storms in February, just like if we see a fairly active hurricane season where all the stuff is there pattern-wise, you would expect to see a lot of activity in the month of September. They usually add up. You know, 1 + 1 always equals 2. And when you see the pattern setting up, it usually delivers. All right? All right, well, that's it for me for today. Just a quick look at what's going on. A little bit of this in the tropics, a little bit of that for the winter weather stuff. And other than that, hopefully, at least from a weather perspective, a fairly boring week ahead, because we know everything else in the world is anything but. All right, you guys stay safe out there. That's the bottom line. I want to keep you educated and informed on the weather front. Everything else, well, that's up to you, and those topics are beyond my realm. But seriously, you guys stay safe, and as always, thanks for tuning in. I am Mark Suttoth, HurricaneTrack.com. I'll talk to you again next week.